So I tried seamless co-op Invasions, and I have some thoughts. If you're unfamiliar, seamless co-op is exactly what it sounds like. A fan-made mod for Elden Ring that essentially removes the vast majority of multiplayer restrictions. It lets players cooperate and jointly progress without getting disconnected at the end of each boss fight or death. At time of recording, the mod has over 2 million unique downloads and has been widely praised by those in the PC community who want to play the game with their friends with as little interruption as possible. Originally, this seamless play also meant no invasions, which was an immediate no-go for me. A Souls game without invasions is, as far as I'm concerned, not a Souls game. It's a required part of the formula that I can't live without. My blood runs red, not only with the vigor of communism, but with the insatiable need to invade. So I wrote off the mod as a division of the player base that sought to appeal only to the more casual crowd. But the developers of the mod recognized that it need not be so limited. Recently, they added invasions through their own matchmaking system. Not only that, but they support a 6-player limit, meaning 4v2s are again possible. And the icing on the cake? They removed the need to go through easy anti-cheat to play and leverage the newer Steam networking API to help lower latency when matchmaking. By all accounts, the mod addresses the most serious of my issues with Elden Ring's multiplayer, but it isn't perfect. I have only put a few hours into the mod, spent exclusively testing the invasion system, so I have a very limited scope when judging the changes. That said, I do have some basic concerns and immediate flags that I'd like to share, as well as my initial impressions. First on the list, invasions are optional. You have to set a value in your configuration file to enable invasions at all, though it does seem to be on by default. Still, having invasions optional is something I'm not a fan of, though I completely understand why. A big appeal of the mod is the ability to play with as few interruptions as possible, and many players view invasions as an unnecessary interruption they'd rather play without. And as much as I can argue with them about how essential invasions are to the experience of the game, I'm not going to win anyone over if they don't see their value. Beyond that, it's probably in the mod's best interest to make a change like this optional, as it could easily turn away players, thereby hurting activity. I may not share those players' enthusiasm for what I would consider a lesser experience, but that's not my call to make, and I do not begrudge them for it. All I'll say is that if you play without invasions, for any reason, you're missing out on one of the most unique parts of the experience. Whether or not you care is up to you. Moving on. When I first tried invading in Seamless, I did so on my level 10. While the build isn't especially powerful, it regularly finds activity and can hold its own against early game groups. I was expecting to encounter players who might be more organized than the standard game, as they could be cooperating with fewer restrictions. To my mild surprise, the teams I invaded were virtually identical. People just playing as they normally would, though perhaps with a bit less direction. They seemed far more, well, casual about their progress, as they could just ride around and explore. That's actually a good point to bring up. You can use Torrent in multiplayer with the mod, and it's pretty interesting. Mounted travel in a group is a major plus, meaning you can actually cover ground at a reasonable pace. Not to mention, anyone in the session can use their mount, meaning that as an invader, so could I. I would summon in and ride my steed into battle, hoping for an epic entrance to start the fight. Unsurprisingly, my appearance caught pretty much everyone off guard. They were either wandering around with no clear motive and had no idea they were under attack, or they were camped out at a grace and waiting for nothing in particular. As I engaged, I found the fights were about the same as the standard game until one of the mod mechanics came into play. The first thing I noticed is that I was able to invade outside of the typical level range. My character at level 10 should be able to invade characters between levels 9 and 31, but in the mod I was able to invade players as low as level 1. I didn't get an invasion above the 20s, so I can't confirm how high the range extends, but my suspicion is that invading uses the standard matchmaking formula for cooperation rather than the adjusted invading range. This is a welcome change for me, as I always felt the 10 to 20 level advantage given to the host and the inability to invade downward in any meaningful sense did more to damage activity than balance PvP. Again, I don't know how the mod formula works, but it seems a bit more accommodating. I should also bring up that Invading is actually rebranded as Wandering, where you can be either a normal wanderer, something I have yet to experience, or an evil wanderer. As an evil wanderer, you retain your full flasks, can use rune arcs, are not color shifted, and can pick up items in the host's world. You basically function as a host, which I suspect is true of all cooperators and standard wanderers as well, though I have not yet tested those. Of note, you are removed from the world whenever the host starts a boss fight, much to my dismay. I had sincerely hoped to be able to fight alongside a boss, and have always found fog walling to be a huge point of frustration. Maybe there's a setting for this, or maybe it'll be addressed in the future, so I'll leave that alone for now. It should also be noted that, as an evil wanderer, you do not restore flasks upon defeating a cooperator. Seems a bit odd if every player gets their full flask amount, but again, I don't know how much of this is specific to player settings, or if it's something being actively considered in development. Speaking of settings, the game allows you to enable or disable Spirit Ashes in multiplayer. I have no idea if it is per player, per game world, or something else entirely, but with my setting enabled, I was able to summon Spirit Ashes whenever I tried while invading. Initially, I had read in the config file that Spirit Ashes were an option, and I took note, though I didn't give it much thought. My realization came when I invaded some cooperators and one of them summoned wolves. The ashes were glowing red, indicating hostility in both wolves and communists, and they attacked me accordingly. I was delighted by this. Having to face down 2 comparative novices and their pack of wolves was a really impactful experience that I knew immediately I wanted more of. Unfortunately, it was soured by 2 very real issues. One, the Spirit Ashes were extremely buggy, fading in and out of existence seemingly at random. I could hit them, and they could hit me, but they would just disappear for no reason, as if being unrendered by a glitch. And 2, I could also summon Spirit Ashes. Specifically, I was able to summon my +10 Dung Eater. Now, for those of you who do not make low-level builds, Spirit Ashes are an invaluable tool as they do not affect your matchmaking. This is because, outside of a specific arena mode, you cannot use Spirit Ashes while in multiplayer in the standard game. This means you can max out a powerful Ash, such as the Dung Eater, letting them be your tank for any particularly difficult encounter. It's a great quality of life feature that makes low-level builds a lot more accessible than in previous games. But, in Seamless Co-op, you can use those Spirit Ashes if the setting is enabled, and as far as I can tell, they are not factored into the matchmaking formula. If you invade, you may see the problem. My level 10 build uses +3 regular weapons and +1 somber weapons. This way, they can invade players with no upgrades and players with up to +6 or +2 upgrades. A pretty reasonable range assuming I'm invading players between levels 9 and 31. But my Dung Eater is +10, equivalent to a max upgrade weapon. If you've never fought a max upgraded spirit with basically unupgraded gear, pray that you are never forced to do so. Each time I summoned my Dung Eater, I just sat back and watched. The cooperators would strive and struggle, doing everything in their power to take him down, but he was just too powerful. Most of his attacks would remove more than half their health bar, and their attacks did little to phase him. The outcome was essentially guaranteed. In my limited tests, no one managed to best the spirit. Those who tried to run found that Spirit Ashes don't seem to be bound to a certain range or time limit, as we were able to pursue indefinitely. There may be limitations I am unaware of, though we did not reach them. Let me say, I should not be able to do this. Spirit Ashes in multiplayer is a good idea, and I support it. I love the idea of playing a summoner or just always having an NPC companion for the long road ahead. but having their upgrade level not factored into matchmaking is a questionable decision that could create unnecessary friction. It could push people away from allowing invasions at all if they think every invader is just going to summon an OP spirit and watch the carnage. Then again, it's not like there aren't a whole host of much scummier tactics that can be employed, on either side, to ensure a bad time. Spirit Ashes are pretty low on the offender list, so maybe it's okay. There's the added fact that my Spirit Ash had a close to 50% failure rate, where it was unable to damage one or more of the enemy players. I don't think it was the same issue I experienced with the wolves, rather it seemed like they couldn't interact at all, and possibly that the Spirit Ash wasn't even visible to them. The buggy performance meant it couldn't be my only strategy, though when it worked too well. And they could do the same to me, so it's hardly a one-sided issue. Sure, invaders are more likely to have late-game upgrades, but there's a lot of variables regarding cooperation that I just don't know enough about to accurately assess. Worst case as I see it right now is every multiplayer match could be a big Spirit Ash slugfest waiting to happen. At least at low levels. There are, I'm confident, worse fates. I'm also not sure if my Spirit Ash not affecting my matchmaking had anything to do with me importing my character from the standard game. It's quite possible that the mod had a separate value for Spirit Ashes that is triggered when leveling them that I did not trigger by already having a plus 10 Ash. My level and weapon upgrades are values that exist in the base game, so they could be referenced easily, but the mod may not be capable of assessing a value that isn't there until changed. I'm not a developer and I have limited experience with this end of the matchmaking, so I'm just blindly speculating based on my experiences with getting around cheat engine restrictions in Dark Souls 3. If you had a max upgraded weapon and manually changed your value with cheat engine, the matchmaking system couldn't tell the difference. I suspect a similar issue may be occurring with the mod if they otherwise would factor Spirit Ash upgrades. And it's worth pointing out that a mod like this is more vulnerable to cheaters. Easy anti-cheat isn't exactly great software, but having no safeguards in place means you're more likely to encounter some level of cheating. I was fortunate to not encounter anything obvious in my limited playtime, though the possibility that I was cheating by simply importing my character isn't exactly reassuring. I'd say keep regular backups of your save and play with a healthy skepticism of excessively weird or inconsistent behavior. The developer says to expect bugs, so I'd recommend assuming whatever weird thing is happening isn't malicious unless provable otherwise, and doing your best to keep things fair. There are a ton of other things with this mod that I haven't touched on yet. Mounted combat is extremely novel, but a little lackluster in practice. Hosts running away on horseback is pretty annoying, but no less annoying than them running away normally, and I generally prefer the ability to get around easily to getting locked into a bad spawn location and walking for miles. The mod also lets you fast travel to the host, so that's nice. It didn't work every time for me, but it's a good idea and I'm glad they included it. Time trying to find someone is often time wasted, so I appreciate the expedited approach. When you invade, you're told the number of cooperators to defeat. I'm not sure if it's total kills or just listing the number of participants. I found that on several occasions I would defeat the host, then defeat their cooperator, only to need to defeat the host again. I have no idea how the respawn system is supposed to work, so I just kept fighting until it told me to go home. It clearly needs some work and/or clarification. You can also enable a setting to view your opponent's level and ping, which is a huge quality of life improvement. I've always assumed the games obfuscate these values to preserve a sense of immersion, but when the game's performance can be as immersion-breaking as it is with Elden Ring multiplayer, I'll take as much info as I can get. Overall, this is a really interesting mod and style of play. It feels fresh and weird, and I like it. It's way too soon for me to pass any meaningful judgment, but I definitely want to play around with it and see how it goes. The future of Elden Ring is in a weird spot, and I can't say for sure if seamless co-op is the answer in the ever more likely event that FromSoft disappoints with the final patches. Indie mod projects like this are often frail and rely on continued community interest and support. The performance seems perfectly usable, but far from ideal, even when compared to Elden Ring's default experience. All said, this is a really cool thing to exist, and I'm glad the developers have taken an interest in expanding Elden Ring's experience, rather than just catering to a single audience. Miyazaki has acknowledged the mod, and hopefully it informs at least some of FromSoft's future decisions with their multiplayer design choices. Let me know in the comments your thoughts on seamless co-op and what you'd like to see them add or adjust. If you haven't tried the mod for yourself, I'll leave a link in the description. Sadly, it's only available on PC, so I'm sorry to all my console viewers. If you want to get into PC gaming, leave a comment and I'll help you build a computer. I'm going to make more videos about Elden Ring and seamless co-op, so if you're interested, consider subscribing and liking the video. Until then, thank you for watching.